Tony's room. It's strange when I think back now, to realize how close I might have come, how one tiny detail and a little bit of luck can change everything in a moment, how things could very easily have been very, very different. I first met Tony about a year ago, on an online dating platform. I won't mention the name of the app here, but I will say that if I did mention it, you would have heard of it. Initially, the conversation was just text. I had liked her photograph, she had liked mine, and we had got chatting as people do. She came across in texts as sweet, intelligent and funny, but it wasn't until we started talking on video that I really started to fall for her, for a number of reasons. Firstly, there were her eyes. Whilst I could obviously see her eyes in the handful of photos she had posted of herself, seeing them on video was a totally different experience. Like the difference between seeing a stuffed tiger squatting in the glass case of some outdated museum and seeing a wild one in its natural habitat, all lithe muscle and tensile strength, moving like fluid potential. There's no comparison. Seeing Tony's eyes was like that. When you saw them moving, catching the light and filled with spark and enthusiasm, they came alive, flickering in tones of azure and sapphire. My mum used to say that some people have light in their eyes. It was never really captured in the photos, but on camera, that was exactly what seeing Tony's eyes was like. I'll admit that sometimes when we were talking, I would use the zoom function on my laptop to enlarge her image so that just her eyes were showing, so that I could see them more clearly. She'd be talking away, and all I would see is the portion from just above her eyebrows to the bridge of her nose, and yet I could see all of the expression and animation in what she was saying just from that small snapshot. I actually admitted to her once that I did this, and she found it hilarious, and I hoped at the time, a little endearing. Beyond that, there was her manner and her wit. I always think that text shows a polished, practiced version of a person. What that person would be like with time to think about what they were going to say. I know for a fact I have friends who are hilarious on Twitter and Facebook because they have time to think up a retort or a joke, but who are really nothing special when you talk to them in real time. Tony wasn't like that. On camera, she seemed relaxed, confident and at ease, bouncing between topics and ideas like a child in a toy store, fascinated by every new subject and item and greedy to take in more. You often got the sense when talking to her that she was eager to take in everything that life had to offer, and was acutely conscious of the fact that she only had a limited amount of time in which to do that. For some, that might sound a bit too frenetic and energetic, but for me, it was perfect. Often we would go on video calls, telling ourselves that we were only going to talk for a few minutes, but would then end up chatting for hours, the time seeming to just leak away, unnoticed as we spoke, fascinated by one another and the constant possibility of more to explore. With every new direction the conversation took, a new vista or area to investigate seemed to open up, and honestly, I looked forward to getting lost in the labyrinth that seemed to be her interests and ideas. I hoped at the time that she felt the same. The only clue, the one tiny indication I ever got that there might be something odd or not quite right about Tony, was a thing she once said about shopping. I mean, it sounds such a mundane topic, but like I said at the start, small details can make a big difference. We were talking about shopping in our local towns, how I preferred going to the small local businesses rather than the supermarket, not only because they had better produce, but because I like to help out the local traders. I said that the supermarkets were convenient, but that sometimes I actually liked dedicating some time to go food shopping, to go between the different shops and see what was on offer, talk to the store owners, that sort of thing. She agreed, and began telling me how she used to go into town every Sunday and just stroll around between the different stalls. As part of that discussion, though, she made one weird comment, saying that sometimes I'll walk past the butcher's window and just get kinda hypnotized by it, you know? I thought she was talking about the prospect of eating the stuff that was displayed, and so I replied that yes, I understood what she meant. As I nodded, though, she let out a huge sigh, as if relieved, and then dived into a whole rant about it. "Oh my God," she said with an embarrassed giggle. "I'm so glad you said that. Sometimes I think it's me that's just a bit weird, so, to hear someone else say it happens to them too, it's kind of a relief." Reluctant to go back on what she had clearly misinterpreted as approval, I attempted to change the subject, but she was already steamrolling on with her own conversation, almost like she was talking to herself. "It's so weird. I've done it since I was a kid. It's something about it, like all that red in the butcher's window. The idea that it used to be one piece, one thing, and now it's lots. Like someone took apart a completed jigsaw or something, and you can see all the individual pieces. I don't know, it used to mesmerize me. Also something about how wet it all was, like you knew the stuff would be firm but also slippery. She laughed out loud at this, and for the first time the laugh unnerved me a little. As if below the sweetness of it, there was something sharp, like rocks under the surface of water, as if I could feel the teeth behind the lips. A few times, she went on, I got in trouble when I was a teenager for just standing there and looking at it all the big stuff hanging there and the plates laid out. I'd just stand there looking through the window for hours. Hours? I remember saying, surprised and assuming this was an exaggeration. Tony nodded, laughed, and coquettishly let the shoulder strap of her dress fall off. Then she turned the conversation to slightly more private matters, and we had some fun over the video call. I'll admit that even then, I tried to bury the idea that the thought of the butcher's window might have gotten her in the mood. She never mentioned anything like that again. To start with, we didn't meet in person. Tony was finishing up a job for her company that she said was eating up every bit of time that she wasn't on calls with me, but she did give the deadline, when that project would be over and we could go on our first date, seeing each other for the first time in person. As the date approached, I genuinely started to feel nervous. It was like we had gotten to know each other in stages, like slowly unwrapping a present layer by layer. First it was text, then video, and then in person. What if the whole thing fell at that last hurdle, I thought? What if she likes me to text and chat on camera, but when we actually meet, she feels different, or she thought I was different, and the whole thing falls apart? By the time the date for our first meeting came around, we had been texting for almost 4 months, and talking on camera almost every day for at least 3. I won't go so far as to say that I was in love with her, because that's stupid when you relate it to someone you've never actually met in person, but I was definitely getting close. As it turned out, the physical meeting never actually happened. About a week before we planned to meet at an expensive restaurant in the center of town, we were talking on video when Tony's doorbell rang, and she had to excuse herself to answer it and see who was there. Before we were interrupted, I had taken my usual step of zooming in on her eyes, focusing in so closely that they filled most of the screen as she talked, and I was able to get lost in them whilst listening to her words. When she moved away to answer the door, I had not zoomed out, and so I got a close-up view of what was behind her and usually blocked by her face. What I saw was an upright mirror. Usually it was positioned behind Tony, and was therefore blocked by her body. Now though, with her out of shot, I could see into it, and because it was a mirror, I could see the rest of the room she was sitting in, the portion usually behind the camera, reflected in that mirror. I remember feeling my stomach tighten as I zoomed out and back in again. What I saw was the other side of Tony's room. The side that was never on camera because the laptop she used was facing away from it, whereas the portion on camera was quite pink and girly and cutesy, showing her bed and cushions, with kawaii dolls and posters of anime characters on the walls. The other side was anything but. The walls were painted a dull shade of grey. There was no furniture, and for all intents and purposes, it was just a grey concrete box. Or at least it would have been, had it not been for all the red. Hanging straight down from the ceiling were hundreds of what looked like fishing lines, each with a curved metallic hook attached to the bottom. Row upon row of them hung pendulously from the ceiling, like some strange chandelier or a mobile that might hang over a baby's crib. Some of these lines were thin, like wire. Others were thick chains, capable of holding a great amount of weight. All of them hung straight down. All of them sported a hook, but only a few of them were empty. Because on those hooks, dangling suspended from the ceiling like decorations, were animals. Cats, rodents, squirrels, and more, all of them pierced in some fashion by the hooks or by several and left to hang there. As I zoomed in and out, looking at this macabre scene, I could hear Tony talking to a neighbour, whom, I could hear, was complaining about the smell that Tony promised to fix. Again, I zoomed in on this hanging forest of tiny lives, hooked and suspended on the other half of Tony's room, at the liquid that was running off them and pooling on the floor. I listened as Tony's footsteps approached, and she came back into the room and saw how the animals, clearly somehow silenced by removing their tongues or larynxes, kicked and struggled, flailing wildly on their hooks, squirming like flies in a spider's web, because most, though hooked up and hanging there, were still alive. I slammed shut my laptop, and with a voice that cracked close to tears, called the police to tell them what I had seen. From the information on my computer, the IP address, and the one Tony had given when registering for the app, the police were able to find the apartment, and Tony was arrested. Since this is an ongoing case, I can't give too many details of what exactly is going on with it, or precisely what they found in Tony's room. What I can tell you is that I was very, very lucky not to have gone on that date with her. That they found over 100 things hanging from those hideous hooks in her room, and that not all of those things were animals.